So to start off with today, what are we going to talk about? Well, today we're going to talk about technically 4 things, really 3, but I'm going to pepper this with just one little administrative item that I think you guys might find useful. I want to start off the presentation today talking about one administrative item called user accounts. Okay, and user accounts, I like to discuss that just because number one, it's good for you to know, and number two, we're actually going to do something with it a little bit later at the end of the presentation. Okay, and I'll explain what that is in just a second. From there, we will then jump into our standard reports. We'll talk about standard reports for a few minutes. We're then going to talk about a portion of the software called Cradle to Grave. Now, I'm going to stop for 2 seconds here and address something really quickly. Some of you today may be using our software on a Cisco phone system. And if you are using our software on a Cisco phone system, it's not going to be called Cradle to Grave. It'll be called Call Detailed View. Okay, so here in this reports section, most of you are going to see this option called Cradle to Grave. If you're on a Cisco phone system, that'll be called Call Detailed View instead of Cradle to Grave. Okay, so that's just one difference if you're on a Cisco system. So just wanted to address that really quickly. So we'll talk about that, and then the last thing we're going to talk about today is recording library. Now, I saved recording library for the end strictly because not everybody on here has recording library. So when we get to that portion, we start talking about recording library. If you don't have that, please don't feel obligated to stick around. I mean, you're welcome to. I'm happy to have you stick around. But if you don't have it and you're like, man, this doesn't apply to me, then you're welcome to leave. I take no personal offense to that. Okay, so I kind of like to just address that so people don't feel like they have to stick around to the very, very end. Okay, so there you have it. That's what we're going to address today, and we'll get to that in just a second. Before I do that, like I mentioned, I did want to talk about some resources that you have access to. If you go to our company website, which is just ximasoftware.com, at ximasoftware.com, we have this support tab. Under support, you're going to see 2 options. One is called Chronicall User Manual. For those of you who are using an Avaya Call reporting software, just substitute that name Chronicall with Avaya Call reporting. Or Chronicle Troubleshooting. Chronicle Troubleshooting, really quickly, it's a site that we've dedicated to helping you with problems when it comes to your software. So this really exists to do just that. It helps with the troubleshooting, hence the name. Oops, I apologize. Come back here. My fault. It helps with the troubleshooting of your software. Okay, so Chronicle Troubleshooting, this is what we recommend that you use if you have issues with the software. This is a great place to start. If you are like me, I like to try to figure it out myself first, and so that's why I come here. I still use this to this day. I've been with the company now for almost 6 years, and I still use this. So this is going to be really helpful when it's addressing issues with your software. If nothing else, if you can't find what you're looking for here, up here in the top right-hand corner, we have a tab that says New Ticket. Okay, New Ticket is where you can actually submit an issue. And we have found recently that this has been the fastest way to get a turnaround. In fact, in regards to Steve's question in the GoToMe chat box, is it preferable to report Chronicle issues instead of the phone support? Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Is it preferable to report Chronicle issues Oh yeah, okay. I apologize. Yeah, see, that's what I thought you meant, Steve, but I want to make sure. Yeah, so that's a great question. So Steve's question is just that. Is it preferable to support it through the web or to run it, to report it through the web? Recently, we have found that yes, it is. And that's just because of the pandemic. We're all sick of hearing about that. We're all sick of dealing with it. But we have found that most recently, we have seen more success with quicker turnarounds when you submit a ticket. Now, you're welcome to call into our support staff, but there's that possibility of having to sit in the queue and things like that. And we try to keep that down. We try to do a really good job at making sure that people don't have to wait too long. But we have found that unless it's a major issue, that this has been the easiest way for people to get response when it comes to running into issues with their software. So yes, in regards to Steve's question, to answer Steve's questions, yes, we do recommend starting with the web. And if that doesn't work, what will happen most often is that they'll come back to you and say, hey, I don't think we can solve this through the web or through the ticket. Let's go ahead and set up a time to talk. And then they'll schedule a call with you. Okay. So either way works. We have found that this has been the best, at least as of recently. Okay. Great question, Steve. Thank you. Now, coming back here really quickly, like I said, this is a great place to start if you're having issues. What I want to address mostly really quickly here is this second, or it's actually technically the first support tab, but the second one I want to talk about, which is Chronicle User Manual. This exists to help you know how to use our software. Okay. Now I will stop really quickly because I do want to point this out. We do have people on our training today who are using various versions of the software. So please pay attention to this note right here. If you are on version 3.12 or older, we don't want you to use this version here. You can actually come up here in the top left-hand corner and switch your version. I recommend switching your version to the one that most closely matches where you're on, okay, or what you're on. And that's just because there are some differences based upon the version of the software that you're using. Okay, there are differences in regards to running reports in particular, as well as using Cradle to Grave or Call Detailed View. So with that said, I would recommend switching this, but the purpose behind this, really more than anything, is just to give you insight in how to use the software. So one of the things I like to point out is, obviously today, as I mentioned, we're talking about reports. If I click on this tab here that says Run Report, this does two things. First, it gives you step-by-step instructions on how to run a report, which I'm going to show you how to do today. And you probably have already done, but we're going to walk through that anyway. But the other thing that this gives you is it gives you a list of the standard reports that are available. And the reason why this exists is because if I click on one of those, what that does is it actually gives me an explanation of that report. I can see a snapshot if I want to. Okay. But the other thing that this gives that I find most helpful is a description of each column found on those reports. So if I want to know what a specific column means on the report, that's what this is for. Okay, so we have all sorts of different articles here that you can use, to learn how to use your software. But keep in mind, this will be dependent on the version that you are on. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're coming in here. But this is a great resource for people when it comes to, hey, how did I run this report? How do I schedule a report? What does this report mean or this value mean? Right? How do I build a wallboard? Whatever your licenses are, we have something that addresses every aspect of that here on this page. Okay, so I wanted to show you that this exists. Again, the way that I access that is just going to ximasoftware.com, or at least that's one way to do so, and going to the support tab and clicking on Chronicle User Manual. The other thing you can do is you can just open up a browser and type in guide.ximasoftware.com, and that takes you here to the same page. Okay, so there's that, so that you now know that that's there if you did not already. For those of you who have been on my training sessions before, you're like, holy cow, beating a dead horse. I just like to make sure that people know that this is here. All right, cool. Well, let's go ahead then and get to the fun stuff. Okay. Now we're using this. There's a couple ways you can access Chronicall or Untitled reporting. That could be a desktop application or it can be a web browser. I'm using a web browser version right now. With this, today we're going to be discussing, again, like I said, kind of four things. We're going to start here in this user management section, and I'll explain that in just a few minutes. But where we're mostly going to live is in reports, where we're going to talk about Run Report, which is our standard reports, and then Cradle to Grave or Call Detailed View again if you're on the Cisco platform. Okay, so we're going to talk about those two things in detail, and then we're going to finish the reporting today talking about this recording section. Okay, so let's actually jump down here to the user management section. You will only have access to this under two circumstances, and number one is if you have an administrator account. The second is if you have a manager account. However, that manager account is going to be a little bit limited to this. You're not going to see everything that you see here. Let's discuss what I mean by that. Let me discuss where that would even come about. Under user management, we're going to go to this option that says user accounts. In user accounts, this gives you the ability to create additional accounts to the software. So I can actually create multiple accounts. If I have people who I want to have access to this to run reports, listen to recordings, whatever that might be, I can create additional accounts at no extra cost. So you can create as many as you want. Go crazy. I don't recommend going crazy. I recommend, kind of keeping it right in. But you could create an account for anybody that you would like to. Okay. To do this, the first thing I have to do is I have to fill out the credentials. Now, depending on your version, there are certain things that may not be here. For example, email. Email might not be there. Don't worry about it if it's not. Okay. But I would come in here. I would put in the credentials for the person for whom I'd like to create this account. So I'm going to create this for a good friend of mine, Jane Smith. Okay. I would then, if it requests the email, go ahead and put in her email. And then from there, I could then put in her credentials. As far as her login name, we'll make this really simple. J Smith, password, 1234. I don't recommend this as a password, but that's just in case I need to remember it. Okay. So once I've got her credentials there, I now get to decide what level of permissions I want her to have. I will start off by saying, service user, we're not discussing this. That has to do with something that we're not discussing on today's training whatsoever. If you're curious, this has to do with what we call our APIs. And you can click on this little question mark here, and it will tell you what that means, right? It tells you what any one of these means. So as a kind of a forefront thing, we're not talking about a service user today. However, these other three options are things that we will really quickly address. If I want to give Jane an account, I do need to decide what level of permissions that should be. If I give her administrator privileges, that means she has full rights. There are no restrictions. So basically, she can do it. If I give her manager privileges, that's really, really similar to administrator in that manager accounts have full access to all phone call information. So I can run any report for any user for any group. I can look at Cradle to Grave or call detail view for any user, for any group, whatever that might be. I can, if I have real time, I can see any wallboard, whatever. Okay, managers have full access to all call information. However, managers will not have access in particular to the system settings. Okay, so managers don't have access to change anything within the system, but they can run any reports, listen to any calls and the recordings, whatever they want to do with those calls. Okay. Last option here is user, and this is the one I want to spend just a minute with. I'm going to go ahead and select user, and then we're going to hit this box here that says edit user access. And that's going to open to me a window where I can now go through and limit what this user can do. In fact, I like to refer to this user account as a limited account. And the reason I call it a limited account is because I'm now going to go through each of the sections, and I'm going to limit what they have access to. Now, these tabs will be dependent on what licenses you purchase. So you may not have the exact same one that I do. And again, one more time, if you are in Cisco, instead of Cradle to Grave, it may say call detail here. Okay. I'm hoping I'll only repeat that one more time. So you might get sick of that, so I apologize. But anyway, I like to just stress that. This gives me the ability now to come through and decide what Jane should be able to do in each section. In Cradle to Grave right now, she has full access. That means she can see every call for every agent for every group. Well, I may not want that. I'm going to come down to partial access, and I might say, you know what? Jane is over our customer service team, and I only want her to see a call if it involves one of those customer service agents. Conveniently, right now in this list, my agents that belong to customer service are these first 10 that I select. There we go. Okay. So by selecting those 10 agents, what that means is when Jane logs into her account and goes to Cradle to Grave, she will only see calls if it involves one of those selected users. If it does not involve one of those selected users, she will not see it. Reporting, same concept. If I switch over to partial access, under partial access, I have several things I can do. It's not just selecting who she can see. I can do that here, down here at the bottom. We have all sorts of different kinds of reports. In fact, here's a list of those reports right here. You may have access, depending on your licensing, what you purchase, you may have access to over 70 reports. That's a ton, right? I may not want her to access every one of those reports. So I can deselect this option that says select all, and I can go through and say, okay, Jane, she should only run the abandoned calls report, the agent call summary report, the agent inbound calls report, and the agent outbound calls report. Those are the only 4 reports she should have access to. So when she logs into her account and goes to reports, she will only see 4 reports, just those 4 that I've selected. Now, even further than that, not only can I select which reports she should have access to, I can select who she should report on, kind of similar to Cradle to Grave. But this time it breaks it down by group and by agent. So if I come over here to accessible groups, if Jane runs a group report, for example, the abandoned calls report, I'll talk about that one a little bit later. But if I want Jane to have access to the abandoned calls report, I can select which group she should report on. And that's probably going to be just hers. So customer service. So if I select customer service, that means Jane, when she goes to run a group report, that'll be the only group that she can choose from. Further still, again, those agents. I only want her to report on these first 10 agents here. Okay. So when she goes to run an agent report and selects that box that allows her to select her agents, it's only going to show those 10. Now up here we have general access. These are kind of some of them are applicable, some of them are not, depending again on your licensing. Create reports is only applicable to you if you have the custom reports module. If you don't have custom reports, then you can just that one's obsolete. You can just kind of forget that one. But if you do have custom reports, I can go ahead and give her access to create reports, or I can remove that option for her to create reports. Do I want Jane to create her own reports? Sure, I don't care. She can knock herself out, create all the reports she wants. Now, that's not typically the idea. That's not typically the general consensus with that, right? You may not want her to create reports. If that's the case, you can just remove that option. Scheduling reports is the one that everyone has access to. If I want Jane to schedule her own reports, I'll go ahead and leave that selected. If I want to schedule those for her, I can go ahead and just deselect that option and I can take care of that for her. I'm fine with Jane scheduling her own reports. She knows what she needs to see, so I'm good with her doing that. Okay. So that's reports. Last one here I'll talk about really quickly is recording. Again, for those of you that don't have recording, bear with us for about 2 minutes here. Okay. Recording provides the main idea behind this. There's actually kind of 2 things that this does. The first thing that it does is Chronicle will go through, and anytime a call is recorded, our call recording library will take that call that has been recorded and it compresses that recording down to what's called a .spx file, which is about 1/10 the size of the file. So the first thing that it does is it saves you a ton of space. The second thing that it does is once that call has been recorded and compressed, it is then made available for you to access that call recording through the Cradle to Grave interface. So if I can access those recordings through Cradle to Grave, or if that's where I go to do that, then it stands to reason that the recordings that I have access to should only apply to the people that I have access to in Cradle to Grave. That's why this list is so much shorter. It's a short list of agents. That's because that's who I have given Jane access to in Cradle to Grave. So once she has access to that Cradle to Grave, and once she has access to those recordings, there are 3 permissions I can give her to do with those recordings. The first is listening. That's the one I'm on by default here. Okay. Under listening, if I want her to listen to recordings for all of those agents, I can leave everybody selected. If there are certain people I don't want her to listen to, I can deselect those individuals. I'm good with her listening to everybody because that's routine. Downloading counts as actually kind of 2 things, downloading/emailing. Now, I'm fine with Jane downloading and emailing your recordings because at that point, really what she's doing is she's telling her team, hey, this is how you're performing really well, or this is where you need some improvement, right? It gives her the ability to show her team how they're performing. So I'm fine with her doing that. If you're not, then go ahead and just deselect everybody. Deleting is the big one. I most likely don't want Jane to delete any recordings, and by default, she will have access to do so. So if nothing else, when I create an account for someone, if nothing else, I want to make sure most likely that if I have recording library, I'm going to come in here under her account, go to deleting and deselect everybody. That way she can no longer delete recordings for anyone. She has access to listen to the recordings. She has access to download/email the recordings. Actually, she doesn't. I removed that. Let me go ahead and put that back in. She has access to do that, but I have removed that permission for her to delete those recordings. Okay. So creating an account is fairly simple. It's just a matter of knowing what you want that person to do. It does take a little bit of time up front, right? Because you're going to be creating accounts for most likely multiple people. But once you've created their account, they have access to that. In the future, if you need to come in and edit that, you absolutely can. I would just come up here where it says new user. Make sure once I save Jane's email, I'll go ahead and hit save. In the future, all I need to do is come in here, select her account, and then I can go ahead and say edit user access again. Okay. All right. Steve had a question. How does Chronicall get the specific agent names presented in a particular format? For example, first name extension. Is that agent format pulled from the Avaya Cisco phone system? I asked that so managers can easily navigate and locate the agents they want to pull reports on. Yeah. So that's a great question, Steve. Yes, it is a particular format that we have put in there. Really what it is, though, it just pulls it over however it's set up in your phone system, right? So if it's pulling it over from Cisco, typically it's going to be name followed by extension. I have some people that just do extension that don't actually put an agent name, but majority of the time it will be pulled over just by default as names and then the extension in parentheses usually. That's typically how that's displayed. But yes, it just automatically pulls it over from the phone system. Okay. Yeah, great question. Great question. Okay. Any other questions on setting up accounts? Okay, cool. All right. Once I've got her account saved, we're good to go. Now we can go ahead and jump into the fun stuff. All right. So let's come up here to reports, and we're going to start in this section here that says run report. Now, there's a good chance you've actually already done this, and I think that's great, and I think you should. If you have not gotten in here, and you may not have had access just until recently, and so once you do have access, I do highly recommend coming in here and checking out these reports, right? These reports can be a little overwhelming. There are a lot of them. And like I said, this will be dependent on some of the licenses that you've purchased. But for the most part, that's a pretty substantial list. Even if you purchase just our most basic form of the software, which is just reports in Cradle to Grave, then at that point, you're still going to have access to over 50 reports, right? So I would recommend taking some time to become familiar with this. Now, here is how I recommend that you do that. We have separated these reports kind of into categories if you will. We have agent reports, we have group reports, we have queue reports, reports that report on external parties. External parties are phone numbers that did not originate in your phone system. In other words, an easy way to say that is your client's phone numbers. Right? So we have all sorts of different reports that you can use. But what I would recommend that you do is when you come in here, if you have not done this before, I would recommend kind of coming in here with a plan. Think about what it is that you want to see, because as you're thinking about that, maybe I want to see agent reports. Now that word agent, that's a universal term that we use to represent user or extension, or even for simpler terms, these are your employees. Okay. Now we don't usually use the word employees because extensions can be assigned to non-humans, if you will, fax machines, things like that. But for the most part, these are just your extensions or your users. Okay. But if I wanted to see a report that talks about agents, all I have to do, there's a couple things I can do. Up here in the search bar, I can type in the word agents. If I spell it correctly, it'll pull up just my list of agents. I can also use these filter tags. If I click on agent, it does the same thing, right? Once I've done that, it makes this list much more manageable. Now, you can do things to make this more specific, okay? If I come in here and I type in the search section, if I type in the word inbound, right, we've already got agent selected. I type in an additional word, inbound. That means it's going to show me my agent inbound calls reports. There are two of them. We do actually have other reports that do focus or that do present agent inbound calls as well. But these two reports right here focus strictly on inbound calls. So sometimes I can use this search bar to help me find things quickly. Most of the time, I personally use this filter tag. Agent is probably one of our biggest groups of reports. Okay. And then from there, external party, group reports, you have all sorts of different things that you can work with, right? So I would recommend just becoming more familiar with what's here and what exists. Obviously, that's going to take some time. It's going to take some practice. But once you find the reports that you use most often or that you would like to use most often, obviously that makes it a little bit easier for you to find them. You also have the option to star the reports. So if I star a report, what will happen is if I hit refresh, it moves those reports to the top of my list. In other words, it prioritizes those reports. So it makes them much easier to find. Okay, so you can do that if that makes it easier for you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put those back in place. I saw that there was another question in there. Steve's question, does the Chronicall desktop app client do any major functions that the Chronicall web client does not? No, they're the exact same. No, they're the exact same. And so the only difference is one uses a browser, the other does not. And that's it. Everything else will be the exact same, regardless of how you use it. Great. Okay, so once I have kind of decided on what kind of report I want to run, from that point, all I have to do is click on that report. And what will happen is over here to the right-hand side, I get kind of an example of that report. Now, the purpose of this example is really just to kind of show you what this report is going to report on. It's not the actual report. Once I run the report, sure, it will have my group or my users, whatever it is that I want featured on the report. But this is just an example. Really, where I want you to pay your attention or put your focus on this is actually these column headers. The column headers are accurate, and it will show you what this report is going to report on. The reason I bring that up is because you'll notice in that report, you start looking at things like caller ID, suspendus, sed, dolor, ipsum, rutrum. It looks like a Game of Thrones report, right? These names don't make any sense. This is just filler information, right? I'll show you another example. This agent call summary report, also a very popular report. If I click on it, it shows me the example. Look at those column headers. That will be accurate. But you might start looking at these names and saying, I don't know any of these people. And then you start looking at these numbers. So inbound calls for Aaron Jackson, 74. Outbound, 100. Internal, 3. Total calls, 66. That doesn't add up. That's just, again, because it's just filler information. Okay, so keep that in mind. Once I run the report, that information will display correctly. But as these little kind of examples, focus your attention on the column headers. Okay. Now, I'll come back to this report in just a second. I do want to quickly just talk about this abandoned calls report because we do get a lot of questions about this one. It is a very popular report. In fact, the question that we get most often is, hey, what's the difference between a missed call and an abandoned call? So I want to explain that really quickly. In fact, just so you also know, we actually have, if I go back to that user's guide site, I actually have an article that addresses that very question. Abandoned calls versus missed calls. So here's a really quick explanation of those two. First and foremost, I will say this. Missed calls are typically going to be found on agent reports. Okay, they can be found on group reports. We do have a few of them that have group missed calls on group reports, but the majority of the time, missed calls are going to be found on agent reports because that's typically being missed at agent level. A missed call is a call that comes into me. It's inbound by default. Inbound calls that come into me, where it rings to my extension, and I don't answer it. Now, that might go to voicemail. It might roll over to another agent. If it rolls over to another agent and that agent answers it, great. That's going to be an answer call for them. But for me, it was a missed call because it rang to my extension and I did not answer it. So a missed call is a call that rings to me. I don't answer it. Now, what if that call goes directly to voicemail? What if it doesn't even ring me? What if it comes to me but then goes directly to voicemail? Will that count as a missed call? No, because it doesn't ring. Okay, if it goes directly to voicemail, that will not count as a missed call. Okay, so missed calls, they ring to me. They're internal or inbound calls, rings to me. If I don't answer it, that's going to be a missed call. Okay. Abandoned calls, on the other hand, are different. Abandoned calls are calls, inbound calls, that do not end with a talking event or a voicemail event. So this is any call that ends in something like a queue or a hold, a park. It can also end in transfer. It can also end in a ringing event. In fact, if a call ends while it's ringing, let's say, for example, the client calls me. While it's ringing, they decide to hang up. I didn't get a chance to answer that call, and they hang up while it's ringing. Obviously, it didn't have a talking event, and it didn't go to voicemail. If it hangs up while it's ringing, it'll actually count as a missed call for me as the agent. But at group level, that'll also count as an abandoned call because it ended in something other than talking or a voicemail. Okay, so abandoned calls are calls that did not end in a talking event or a voicemail event. Now, a couple scenarios there. I've kind of already mentioned this, but if a call comes in, if it goes to queue, they're waiting in queue, they get sick of waiting, they hang up. Final event was queue, therefore it's not going to be, it's going to be an abandoned call. Okay. Here's kind of a weird thing with this report. This abandoned calls report actually has a column on there for answered. How in the world can an abandoned call be answered? Well, I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, you call into me and I answer, hey, this is Blake with Xima Software. Can I put you on hold for just a minute? You say, sure. So I put you on hold, 1 minute passes, 5 minutes pass, you get sick of waiting, so you hang up. Final event for that call was hold. Therefore, it would be an abandoned call. However, I did answer that call, right? I answered it and I put you on hold. Okay. So abandoned calls, this report here will actually go through and show you for the selected time frame every call that was abandoned. It's what we refer to as a detailed report. And the reason being is because, let's say up here, abandoned calls that would say we had 71. What that means now then is we would have 71 lines. Each line represents one call. Okay, so if I want to run this report, this will show me every call that was abandoned. Excuse me. Sorry, I had to sneeze. Okay, so that's an abandoned call. Any questions on abandoned calls? Okay, great. Now, for time's sake here, I want to run that agent call summary report. If there are other questions about reports, guys, obviously we can spend all day talking about reports, but unfortunately we have a limited time. So if you do have questions about specific reports or something like that, then we can absolutely address those. But for right now, I'm going to show you one of our more popular reports. And this is what we call the agent call summary report. And the reason why this is such a popular report is because this allows me to report on all of the interaction with my agents and their calls. Okay, so if you wanted to see how many calls Blake was involved with, that's me, you could run this report right here and it would show you for me how many inbound calls I had, how many outbound calls I made, and how many internal calls I was involved with. Internal calls are extension to extension calls. Okay, and then of course the total of those calls. But you can also see on this report, one of the things we get asked most often is, hey, I want to see how many calls my agents have missed. Well, this report here actually shows you out of those inbound calls, how many of them were answered and how many of them were missed. Okay, so this report kind of does a lot of different things. So we call this the agent call summary. If I wanted to see the details on these calls, right? Aaron Taylor had 77 calls, or a total of, let's just say, for example, or a total of 65. I could use this report right here. This is what we call the agent calls report. It's technically that same report, except it's not showing it to me in a summary format. It's showing it to me in a detailed format. So if Blake had 65 calls, I would see 65 lines, and each call or each line would represent one call. So I can see that in kind of two different ways. So technically, these two reports, agent calls and agent call summary, are the same report. However, this is presenting it in a detailed format, while this is presenting it in a summary format. Okay, so with this report, how do I run it? Well, down here in the bottom right-hand corner, we have what we refer to as the report runner window. This report runner window essentially is just questions. These are the parameters, or what I like to refer to as the questions I'm going to answer in order to run this report. So the first thing it always asks is, what report time frame do you want to see? Right here where it says click to define, all I have to do is click on this ellipsis here. It pulls up a calendar, and then I can select any amount of time that I want to. I can select a day. I can select a week. Granted, that's not a full week. It's like the first through the fourth. Maybe I want to see a full week. We'll say the 7th through the 11th. All I have to do is select the first day of the time frame and then the last day of the time frame, and it highlights everything in between. Okay. Now, the other nice thing about this is I can actually go back from the point that this was installed up until the present point in time. So let's just say I've had this installed, just for fun here. Let's say I've had this installed for 2 years. Could I go back from 2 years ago and run a report? Sure. As long as it was a time when the software was installed. Anything before that, we can't go retroactive. We can't go anything before the software was installed. Okay, we do get that question occasionally. So it's only from the point that it's installed up until the present point in time. Now, I'm not going to do that today. We're actually going to go ahead and run this for yesterday and today. So I'll go ahead and select those 2 days, and then we'll go ahead and hit OK. From this point, this is an agent report. And what we're seeing here is we're going to see this term that says rows with the word agent in parentheses. Anytime you see that word rows, ROWS, what that's referring to is this column right here. Okay, this is our rows column. So in this report, it's asking which agents would you like to see in your rows. So again, I'll come over here to the right. I'll select my ellipsis tool here, and that opens up a window where I can actually do this in 2 different ways. The first, kind of, is actually selecting each individual agent by hand. I can select them each individually like this, if that's what I want to do. Okay, you absolutely can do that, and that's a lot of times what our clients do. However, you do have this other option here called roles. A role essentially is a team or a grouping of agents. Now, by default, these will be based off of your phone system groups or your skills if you're using our contact center. Okay. So with that being the case, with this here, these are my groups. If I wanted to see everybody in that customer service group, I could select that and then hit OK, and that would display every agent on this report that belongs to the customer service group. Now, I like to show you this one thing because it is kind of a nice feature. Right down here, you have a button that says Edit Roles. I will start off by saying you cannot change your phone system groups here within the software. Right? I can click on that at highlights, but it doesn't do anything. Nothing about your phone system groups can be changed here. However, what I can do is I can actually create my own role. So let's take, for example, this customer service group, which is Jane's group. Right? That's that individual we created the account for earlier. There are 61 agents in this customer service group. Maybe Jane is that 61st person, so I'm going to go ahead and say there's 60 agents. Okay. At that point, what I can do is this. Let's say Jane is over a team of 10 of those agents from the customer service group. Maybe we've taken those 60 agents and we've separated them into 6 different groups. Each group has 10, or each team has 10 agents. So here's what I want to do. I want to only report on Jane's team. So I'm going to come down here where it says Create Role, and I'm going to go ahead and call this Jane's team. Okay, just like that. From there, I hit OK, and now we can see Jane's team is there, and it's blue, which means I can edit this. I can now go through and say, okay, these are the people that belong to Jane's team. Okay, I'll go ahead and select those 10 individuals, hit apply, and great. It says we have 10 people assigned there now. I can then go ahead and hit OK, and what happens now is we now see it says Jane's team. If I select that, what that does is it takes those 10 agents that I have assigned to Jane's team. I can hit OK, and that is who this report is going to report on. That honestly is just it's helping us to be lazy just a little bit. This allows me to select a handful of agents without having to select each one of them individually here, and without having to select the entire group. I can create my own team here, or my own teams, so I can select that handful of agents really quickly. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. Cool. Now the last thing here is charts. Charts are graphs. Do I want a visual representation of the columns found on that report? Sure, I guess. Yeah, maybe I want to see a line chart for total calls. In fact, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do a bar chart for missed calls, a line chart for total calls, and a pie chart for missed calls. This one I want to be my focal point, so I can actually also make that a little bit bigger. I can maybe take these two, if it'll let me, and put those together just like that. Okay, so you can adjust that however you want to. Graphs or charts are not required, right? They're optional. But sometimes people like to see that information in a graphical format, and that's totally fine. Now, the last thing I'm going to do here is choose my format. I have 4 formats that I can use for these reports. The first is PDF. Side note for PDFs, if I want those graphs or those charts, I have to run this in a PDF format. Otherwise, I will not see those charts. But you can also run this in an XLS, an HTML, or CSV. So you have those multiple options there. I'll go ahead and run it in PDF, and then for now, I'll just go ahead and hit Run Report. So that is how I run a report. It is fairly simple. The differences in the reports are in these parameters. You know, there might be some that have more parameters than others. There might be some that have fewer. If I look at the 911 calls report, that has one. If it catches up to me here, it has one really. Well, two if you count the charts. The main thing I have to do here is just my report time. Just report on any 911 call that was made. Right. So you know, some of them are going to have more, some of them are going to have less. It just kind of depends on the report. Now, here's my report I just ran. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this just a little bit here. I've got my overall summary up here. This is kind of the grand total. Then I get the breakdown by agent here. I can see here we actually do have some missed calls. If I look at my chart coming down here, there's my missed calls chart. I actually have 3 agents that have missed calls. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on that just a little bit more so I can see that a little bit better. We have Alexandra Burns with 2, Alicia Ford with 1, and Amanda Rivera with 2. If I come back up here, we have 2, 1, and 2, just like we saw. Okay, so running a report again is actually quite simple. It's just a matter of answering those few questions. And once I've run that, then at that point, I'll be able to run that report really easily. I'll have experience with it, nice and easy to do. Okay, now I'm going to show you guys one last thing with reports, but before I do that, any questions on reports in general? Okay, great. All right, the last thing I want to show you with reports before we move on is this. I do have the option to schedule a report. Okay, scheduling reports are fantastic. It's great because I can come in here, I can schedule that report, and then I can just let it do its thing. I don't actually have to get into Chronicall or if I call reporting after that fact, right? I mean, obviously I will for other things, but for the reports, you know, I can just kind of do the whole 1980s infomercial thing, set it and forget it, okay? So when I set up these report schedules, the first thing it wants me to do is it wants me to give this a name. I'm going to go ahead and call this Blake's Weekly Agent Call Summary, ACS. Okay. From that point, I can choose how I want that report sent. I can have it emailed, which is by far the most popular. I can have it saved to a server directory, and I can have it printed if I want to. I can do all 3 if I want. Most often, people have this emailed. If I want this emailed, all I have to do is come in here and put in my email. If I want this to go to multiple people, put a comma to separate those. And then I can go ahead and add whoever else I want to. Jane at email.com. Okay. Mike at email.com. Right, so whoever I want that to go to, I can put that in there. Now I do get asked occasionally, do I have to, you know, what if I put a space between those commas, you know, comma space. You can if you want to, if it helps you sleep at night, but you're not required to, right? You can just put a comma and that should be sufficient. Okay. Now, last thing I'm going to do on this window is choose my format, which I'll go ahead and do with PDF. And then from there, I'll go ahead and hit next. Now on this next window, it's actually going to ask me to do 2 things, kind of 3. The first thing it wants me to do is it wants me to select my delivery time. In other words, when would I want this to deliver for the first time? What day and what time? Okay. The next thing it wants me to do is it wants me to add, to select how frequently I would want this report to repeat after that. And then the third thing is this kind of random thing for schedule reports. We'll talk about this in just a second. So I'm going to come in here where it says click to define, but I like to personally, this is just me personally, I like to make that second decision first. In other words, how frequently do I want this report? Just because that will help determine when I have this report run for the first time. So I already called this report Blake's Weekly, or this schedule Blake's Weekly ACS. So it's going to be a weekly report. I want this report to deliver on Monday, next Monday, the 21st, and I'm going to go ahead and select what time. Now, really, it doesn't matter what time you put it, but my recommendation is to put it at a time closer to when you come in. And the reason I say that is because if I don't, what will happen is this, let's say, for example, I set this or I leave it at the default, which is 12 a.m. So 12 a.m. Monday morning, the 21st hits. And at that point, other emails may come in through the night and it may start burying that report down my list, which is fine. There's a good chance that not a whole lot is going to come in on a Sunday night. But if it does, or if it does for you, I typically will just put this earlier or later in the morning so that way I can make sure that it's not buried by other emails. So I put it like at 8 o'clock. That's just me. Okay, great. From there, I can now choose that frequency of that repeating report schedule. So do I want it hourly, daily, or specific days of the week, weekly, monthly? Weekly is default. It's one of our most common. So I'll go ahead and say weekly. And from there, I can have this be every week, every other week, every 3 weeks, Every 4 weeks at that point, just do it monthly. Of course, that's up to you. Great. So that's what I've got done there. From there, I hit next again, and it now takes me to my last window. And that is this window that's telling me, hey, you've got this agent call summary report scheduled to run Monday, the 21st at 8 a.m. What parameters do you want found on that report? Now, you'll notice that it actually already has parameters in there. And that's just because it remembers the last time I ran this report, this is what I selected to see. Now, at this point, most likely I'm going to run it on that same group of agents, right? So I don't actually have to change my agents. That's already there for me. And most likely I don't want to change my report charts. I can if I want to, but I'm just going to leave those there. So the main thing here I have to change is my report time frame. I want this report to be a weekly report, and I'm going to have it run next Monday, the 21st at 8 a.m. What do I want that to cover? What time frame do I want that to cover? Well, I want it to cover the previous week. I'm going to go ahead and select the 14th and the 18th. And that means on the 21st, I'm going to get a report covering the 14th through the 18th. So in other words, the previous week. After that schedule runs on the 21st, that scheduler moves to the 28th. And on the 28th, I'm going to get a report covering the 21st to the 25th. It then moves to the 4th. On the 4th, I'm going to get a report covering the 28th through the 1st. All right, so it's just going to continue to follow that same pattern until I tell it to stop. So all I have to do is set that once, and then from there, it does the rest. Okay. Again, if I want to change my agents or my charts, I can. Otherwise, I'll just hit finish, and that report is now scheduled to run. Now, if I ever need to make changes to that, because I'm going to come back here to Chronicle menu, and under the reports section, there's actually an option called schedule report, which I absolutely can schedule reports from this window as well. All I would do is I would say new schedule, and then I would go through and select the report I want to run or to want to schedule, and then go through and do that exact same stuff. Okay, so you can do that here as well. However, at this point, I've already got a report scheduled, so there's my report right there. This is the Blake's Weekly ACS. All I have to do from this point is, if I need to make changes to it, I can click on the pencil tool, which will allow me to edit that schedule. Or I can hit the big button that says Edit Schedule. That works too. I also however, have a few other options. I can rerun this report from a previous schedule, which right now would not work because it hasn't run on a schedule up to this point. Okay, so I can run it from a previous schedule. I can run it right now rather than waiting for Monday morning. The nice thing about this is it maintains that schedule for Monday morning. This is kind of just one of those situations where it's like, how are we doing so far? And that's kind of what this is for. Okay. I can create another schedule using this same schedule as a template. So maybe I do want that abandoned calls report, and I want it to follow the same pattern. I want it to be a weekly report running every Monday morning for the previous week. So I can actually do the same thing. All I have to do is click on this, then select the abandoned calls report. It'll schedule to the same people. It'll schedule the same calendar dates if I want it to. I can, of course, change that. The main thing I would have to do on the abandoned calls report is select a group instead of agents, because it's a group report, not an agent report. So there's a few changes I would have to make, but it's a really fast way for me to schedule multiple reports. Okay. And of course, I can delete it, which I will do because I don't need the schedule right now. Right. Any questions on scheduling a report? Okay. Awesome. So I'll go ahead and delete that for now, and then we'll go ahead and hit cancel here. Great. So that covers reports, right? And obviously, like I said, we could spend all day talking about reports. There are a lot of reports there. My biggest recommendation is just get in there and play with those. Okay. Now let's move on to the next portion of reports. And again, this is called Cradle to Grave for most of you. For some of you, it's called Detail View. Okay, but the rules are the same. I'm going to go ahead and click on Cradle to Grave here. And what this is it's actually a different style of report. It is a report, but it's a different style of report. It's not what I'm going to schedule. It's not what I'm going to print off in an Excel spreadsheet or anything like that. This is a report that shows me the finite details of calls. What's actually happening on those calls? So the Cradle to Grave report really does two things. Number one, it validates the reports. If I run a report and some of the information doesn't make sense to me, I can come over to Cradle to Grave and run it for the same criteria, and it'll actually show me the calls that built that report, essentially. The reports are built off of information found in Cradle to Grave. So it's a report validator. The second thing that it does is it's a fact-checking tool. So when someone calls in and says, yeah, I'm really upset, your employee put me on hold for 45 minutes. I want to verify if that actually happens. And that's what this allows me to do. So let's take just a second here and talk about this. We're going to talk about this kind of in stages. So we're going to start off just by talking about how to run it, right? So to start off, we've got our calendar just like we did with our normal reports. So reports or Cradle to Grave is actually running just like running a report. So I select my time frame. Let's go ahead and select yesterday and today. Okay. But before I hit execute, if I hit execute, that runs the report for me. I do have these filters. Now, I'm not going to go to this yet. I am going to cover one just because I just want this to show my calls. If you have our external web chat module, for those of you on the Avaya IP office using our contact center, then at that point, you can see your chats here. We're not discussing chats today, so I don't want to see those. I just want to see my calls. Okay, so I'll talk about other filters in just a second. For now, let's go ahead and hit execute. And what this is going to do is it's going to go through and pull every single phone call that took place during that time frame and display them chronologically. So I've got a total of 637 total calls between yesterday and today so far. Now I'm going to zoom in on this just a little bit. I'm going to hold my control button down and zoom in with my mouse wheel so we can see this just a little bit better. Okay. Cradle to Grave looks a little confusing, or I don't want to say messy, but it looks kind of information heavy at this point in time. This is a fantastic tool, like I said, to validate those reports and to verify what the facts, I guess you could say. But the point is when I first start looking at this, this shows me some basic call information. It shows me the name of the caller. There's a caller name. So this is an inbound call. Here's his calling party. That's his phone number. Personally, I like to move calling party next or calling name next to calling party. It allows me to see that just a little bit better. I can see who the receiving party was, where they're calling from, which group that call involved, all sorts of great information there. When it came in, when it ended, that kind of stuff, right? So that's good. That's nice. I also can click on these column headers so I can see which columns are currently selected to view and which are not. If there are columns here, such as location, I don't care about location, so I'm going to remove that, right? So you can adjust that how you want to. That's nice. But really where this comes into play and as an effective tool is this. If you look next to each call, there's a little expansion symbol. If I click on that, what that does is it expands that call so I can see the details of every event of that phone call. This is the lifespan of the call, from the cradle to the grave, beginning to end, birth to death, womb to tomb, whatever you want to call it. It shows me the beginning to end of that phone call. So we can see here, for example, this call was an inbound call. Henry Browning was the caller. I will mention this caller ID information is based off of simple, basic caller ID. If the phone service provider for the caller provides that information, we will see it. Most often, we get a phone number, and our hope is to get a name as well, but it doesn't always present a name. It'll almost always present a phone number. Occasionally, you do get situations where there is a unknown number or an unknown name, or if a blocked number as well. If that's the case, then we're going to see questions of that. Okay, but most of the time, we're going to get at least a phone number. Now we can see here that when Henry called in, he went to the auto attendant for 50 seconds. Now auto attendant may not be that exact same thing for everybody. An auto attendant is that message that people hear at the beginning of the call, right? So hey, for sales, press 1. For support, press 2. That's what this is referring to with auto attendant. Okay. So he was in the auto attendant for 50 seconds. From there, he selected to speak to the marketing group. So it rang to the marketing group for 6 seconds. Well, at that point, it was answered by extension 1182, Mario Kelly. They spoke for 2 minutes and 5 seconds, and then Mario proceeded to put him, Henry, on Park. Now, again, Park is an event. If you're not familiar with Park, it's very, very similar to Hold. The difference is this. If I put you on Hold, only I can take you off of Hold. But if I put you on Park, anyone within my group can take you off of Park, which is exactly what happened. Cynthia Hart, extension 1113. She came in and picked that up. She spoke to Henry for 2 minutes and 23 seconds. She then initiated a transfer. The transfer took place. It rang again for 11 seconds back to the marketing group, where it was one more time answered by Mario Kelly. They spoke for 1 minute and 2 seconds, and the call ended. Right here, it says receiving drop. What that indicates is who hung up first. Some of you are going to care about that. Some of you are not. Receiving drop means that the receiving party hung up first. If I want to know who that is, just look at the final person for the receiving party. That was Mario Kelly. In other words, Mario Kelly hung up first. Occasionally, you'll see it where it says calling drop. Calling drop just means that the caller hung up. And again, just look for the caller name or the calling party, and that will show you who the person was that hung up first. Okay. So Cradle to Grave is very detailed, but it helps you understand the path that phone call took. We do get a lot of people that ask, hey, I want to see that call from beginning to end. I want to see the call flow pattern. And here we can see what actually happened. We get to see every one of those events, even to the point where what happens if it gets transferred? Yeah, we'll still see that through the end. Okay, so this gives you the ability to see directly those granular steps that phone call took. Okay, now I'm going to show you a couple of things with this really quickly, but before I do that, any questions on this so far? Okay. All right, so here's my issue. Typically, I'm using this to help me understand something that took place on a call or on specific calls. My problem with that is I don't have time to go through 637 calls. So there's a few things I can do. I need to narrow down my calls. And the best way to do that is either use this search tool or I can use my criteria. We'll do the search tool first. The search tool is what I like to call the quick search tool. Let's say that person calls in and says, yeah, I'm really upset. Your employee put me on hold for 45 minutes. Well, not that I don't believe them, but I kind of don't believe them. So at that point, I can say, okay, well, what's your name? Right? I can start off by trying their name. Most often, the easiest thing to do is to ask them what their phone number is. They can then tell me their phone number. Oops. I'll type it in just like it is. Okay. I don't add any spaces. I don't add any dashes or parentheses. I just add it as is. And from there, you'll see it actually takes me to calls that are associated with that phone number. Now, I like to mention this here. It shows me that there are 24 instances of that number. That does not mean that there are 24 calls. It just means that there's 24 events that took place involving that number. Okay. So here's the first one. It's the actual call. But if I click down on this, this takes me to the next event, which is auto attendant, and then to ringing event, and then to talking event. Every event involving a specific call or involving a specific number will have that number displayed next to the event. Okay. So that clearly is not the specific call I'm looking for because they said, hey, they put me on hold. All right, well, let's keep clicking down until we find a call that has a hold event. Okay. Well, here's an instance of this. Okay. This is a park event. Okay, that's kind of a hold, right? They were on park for 4 seconds, and then down a little bit further, there's another park event for 49 seconds. So this person so far has been on hold for less than a minute. Okay, we can keep going until we find that call, right? There's a 52-second event park event, right? So we could go through until we find that. There's a minute and 52 seconds, right? So we can see here that there has not been an instance, at least not during this time frame, that there was a 45-minute hold event. Right? So that's just one thing we can do. So we can keep clicking it down until we kind of find what we're looking for. Okay. There was a question from Steve. Can the Cradle report portions be exported to PDF? PDF, yes. Absolutely. PDF, yes, just not to CSV or a text file or anything like that at this point in time. It's not really exporting it. What you can do is you can print it, right? So you can print that as a PDF or save it as a PDF, but it cannot be exported into something else at this point in time. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay. Awesome. So that's one thing I could do. I could use that quick search filter tool. Well, my issue with that, it doesn't remove any other calls. It kind of just takes me to the calls that are associated with that number, which is great, but I'm a purist. I want to see just calls that fit that criteria. So that's where I'm going to come back here to this criteria button. And in here, I can use now my filters to help me narrow down to find those specific kinds of calls. Now, these filters, I would always recommend that you start with the most simple aspect. What happens a lot of times is people will add all their filters all at once, and a lot of times that works just fine. But we do have situations where sometimes people add all their filters at once and then they get 0 calls back. And they're like, I know for a fact that agent had calls. The issue is sometimes when you add these filters, they can contradict other filters. So if they contradict each other, then it will actually say that there are 0 calls. So my best recommendation is to start layer by layer. Okay, so here's what I mean. The first thing I want to do is I want to see calls for specific agents. Right? So here it says agent. I open this up, and I can now either use those roles, or I can come up here where it says users, and I can go ahead and say, I want to see calls for Matthew Sanders. Right? So I can search through, I can scroll through, or I can just type his name. Matthew Sanders. There we go. Great. Now I can hit OK and then execute. Awesome. So from here, we see that we have calls for Matthew Sanders, at least we will, and there were a total of 73 between yesterday and today. Okay, that's a pretty fair amount. Right? So all of those calls we can look here have Matthew Sanders involved. Okay. Let's be more specific. Great. We're looking for calls with Matthew Sanders. That's the first part. Awesome. I want to see calls that have Matthew Sanders involved where there's a hold event or a park event or something like that, right? So I can come down here where it says event type, and I can go ahead and say, okay, I want to see his calls that have that hold event. Okay. Okay, again, we go from 73 calls down to 6 calls total that have a hold event for him, right? So the idea basically is that you're using these filters to help you narrow down to find only calls that fit that criteria, which of course you don't have to do, but I find it easier when I'm trying to find things or calls with specific information. Okay, I'm going to do one more, and that's call level. We've got calls with Matthew Sanders where there was a hold event. Well, I only want to see it if that hold event was greater than 2 minutes. So now I can come down under this call level. I've got event type selected as hold. Okay, I'm going to scroll down under this call level filter. There's an option called event duration. Now that requires me to select events, which I already did, hold. Now I can come down here and say, okay, greater than or equal to 2 minutes. We can go ahead and hit execute, and I don't know if we'll have anything, but we have one call. Perfect. That's great, right? We can say, okay, and we can verify. Maybe the person called in and says, yeah, my name is John Shelton, and your employee put me on hold for 45 minutes. Well, there's my hold event involving Matthew Sanders and that individual person, and that hold event was 2 minutes and 20 seconds. So they're a little bit lying, okay, or they're exaggerating. That's a better way to put that. Okay. So Cradle to Grave just helps me to narrow down to find calls that fit specific criteria, and that's really the benefit of this. When I want to know what actually happened, right? Those reports are great because it allows me to see kind of a snapshot. I can run a report, say, here are the totals. Boom, there it is, right? Here's the big picture. But if I need to narrow down to see what actually happened, I would use Cradle to Grave because it gives me, like I said, those minute details of those phone calls. And even further, if I have if I have recording library, which we haven't talked about yet, but if I have recording library, if that call is recorded, I listen to that call here in Cradle to Grave as well. So I can see the call and I can listen to it again if I have the recording library. Okay. Awesome. Any questions about Cradle to Grave? Or further questions, I should say, about Cradle to Grave. Okay. All right. Cool. Well, guys, that covers reports and Cradle to Grave / again, call details view for those of you who are on Cisco. Let's now get into recording library. Okay. So again, as I mentioned earlier, if you don't have recording library and you don't want to stick around for this portion of the training, like I said, you are not required to do so. Of course, you are welcome to. Right? I'm perfectly happy to have you guys here, but please don't feel obligated if you don't have it. Recording library is actually really simple. And what I mean by that is it's not necessarily simple on the back end, but for you to use it is really quite easy. Yeah, you're welcome, Steve. Not a problem. Okay. There's actually 2 ways that I can access my recordings. I know that sounds a little kind of contradictory to what I told you just a few minutes ago, but let me tell you what I mean. I can come here where it says recording, and I can click on this option here that says listen to recordings. That's clearly what I want to do. The thing with that is that honestly just takes you to Cradle to Grave. So I could go into first recording and say, listen to recordings. That takes me to Cradle to Grave. Or I could just go directly to Cradle to Grave. Either way. Okay. At this point in time, however, I do have my filters here again. I'm going to go ahead and select my time frame. And again, I only want to see just my calls. I'm not worried about my chats. Hit OK. And then from this point, I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, and I'm going to find my option for is call recorded. Okay, we're going to set that at true. And at this point, I'll go ahead and hit execute, and that will go through and now only pull calls if it was a call that was recorded. Now, for recording library, like I said, it's actually pretty simple. And I just realized my audio may not be working for you. If you have been trying to talk to me, I'm noticing here that it's not playing any audio on my side. You can still hear me, obviously, but I might not be able to hear you. So if you were trying to talk to me, if you tried to ask a question through audio, I apologize. I just didn't hear that, so I'm so very sorry. I'm not sure why. Past couple of days, my soft phone has been doing this, and so I apologize if you've been trying to ask me questions and I haven't answered you. Okay, so hopefully, if you had questions, you were putting those in that chat box. Okay. All right. Now with this, as calls have been recorded, you can see over here I've got this recording column. I can go ahead and pull this over here. And I can see here every call that's recorded. All I have to do to listen to that call recording is hit play. Once I hit play, there's my call. Right now, at the bottom here, I can see here my wave pattern. I can see where there's talking. Here's the cool thing about this. Maybe I need to fast forward through some blank or empty space. I've done that before, right? I'm listening to a call recording, and like I can tell that there's not a lot of talking at certain points, so I can actually fast forward. All I have to do is click and drag. Maybe I want to rewind. Maybe Blake said something and I didn't quite catch it. I'm going to go ahead and rewind so I can hear that again. Right, and I can just hit play. Okay, so you can do that if you'd like to. Over here to the right-hand side, we've got this little hamburger icon. Hamburger icon actually shows me what permissions I have to use with these recordings. Now, this, of course, will be dependent on the level of permissions that were assigned to me when the account was created for me. Now, I'm using an administrator account, so I have full privileges. Manager accounts would look the exact same. They have full privileges. However, earlier today, we created an account for Jane, and we removed the option for her to delete recording. If I was in her account right now, delete recording would be grayed out. She would not be able to use that. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind here. So Jane or I have access to download, email, and delete recordings. That's fine. But there are 3 other options that I can use with these recordings. As I'm listening to this recording, I can hit this option here that says View Notes. I will tell you this right now. My demonstration version of the software does not demonstrate this very well. I'll explain what I mean by that. But if I hit View Notes, what I can actually do is I can say Add Note, and I can add a note to this call. This is my note. Okay. What would happen here now is once I hit Save and hit Close, that note would now be added to this call recording. In fact, this is where it doesn't demonstrate very well. Right here, there'd be a little red pin indicating that a note had been added. And I can click on that, and that would show me what the note was. In addition to that, I would also see under the C2G Notes section, if I click in there, I would see a little icon there representing that a call had been added, or a note had been added. Now, I'm going to click on another call just to kind of show you what this might look like. Let's see if this will work for me. Okay. So I've got my note. Oh my goodness. There we go. Hit save. And there we have it. It would look like this. All right. So I would be able to see, oh, okay, there's my note. So a note had been added to this call. I can click on it and see it. It would show me all the notes that have been added. So I can actually add multiple notes. Like I said, in my demonstration version here, it doesn't save it. In your live versions, it will. So it would add that little pin drop. I can also click on view notes and see any notes that were added to that call. Okay. So you can view notes or add notes to the call. You can also change the playback speed. Playback speed basically just means I can speed Blake up or I can slow him down. If Blake's a long talker and I just need to get through that recording, I can go ahead and double that speed or up to double that speed. Obviously, I have other options here, but I can go up to double that speed, which means I can get through Blake's calls quicker. This does not make Blake sound like Alvin from the Chipmunks. Keeps his normal voice tone, but it does speed him up. Or maybe you didn't quite catch what Blake said, so you slow this down. Right? Doesn't make me sound like Barry White, right? That deep, low voice, but it does slow me down so you can hear more clearly what it is I'm saying. Right? So you can change the playback speed of that recording. Okay. The last thing here is to create a snippet. Creating a snippet basically just means this. I mentioned this earlier with Jane. I might want Jane to be able to send her agents or the people on her team recordings to say, hey, this is where you did really well, or hey, this is where you need some improvement. The issue with that is I might not want Jane to have to force those agents to listen to the entire call recording, right? I mean, she could send them the whole recording and say, hey, listen at minute 138. Well, or whatever it might be, right? Well, creating a snippet allows me to decide what portion of that recording I want to send to someone. So maybe I want this person just to hear this like 5-second section or however long it is, right? At that point, I can hit download. It will generate a file that I can then attach to an email and send to someone. That then gives them the ability to listen to that recording, but just that portion that I want them to hear, that I've created a snippet for. So I don't have to send them the entire recording. I can just send them a snippet of it so they can hear just what it is that I want them to hear. Okay. So those are the features that I can perform with the recordings. Now, there's one last thing I'm going to talk about recording really quickly, but before I do that, any questions on these items here? Okay. All right. One last thing. This one's kind of major. You have the option as well to create what we refer to as a scorecard, okay, or a scorecard campaign. A scorecard campaign, I'm going to come under the recording section and go here where it says score recordings. Essentially what a scorecard campaign is it's a series of questions that I can now use to evaluate the performance of my agents. Okay, so I might want to be able to evaluate how they're performing, and I don't want to listen to all of their recordings, but I want to listen to some of their recordings. That's what a campaign allows me to do. Once I set up a campaign, it will start pulling recordings at random for the selected agents that fit the specific criteria, and it will then assign them to this campaign. Okay, I can listen to them in Cradle to Grave. I don't have to come to the campaign to listen to them. But it will pull recordings and assign it to this campaign. And once it's assigned to this campaign, I can come in here and I can right-click on my campaign and say score. At that point, it would then open up this window where it allows me to listen to the recordings for the calls that are part of this campaign. And as I'm listening to those recordings, I can now go through and answer some questions. Now, we have 3 kinds of questions. We have yes or no questions, we have scale of 1 to 10 questions, and we have free form or text questions. Nice, right? Once I have answered those questions, once I have scored this call, I can hit submit survey. And what would happen now is that call is now associated with that campaign has been scored. What you can do is come over here to the reports, and we have what we refer to as campaign reports. Okay. These campaign reports allow me to now take that information and display it to the agent or present it to the agent. So this is being able to, I guess you could say, present metrics based upon those scorecards. So this is not just me listening to the call and saying, hey, cool, nice, they did this. Now you can do that for sure, that's fine. But if I want to use this to evaluate the performance, I can set those scorecards, listen to those calls, score them, and then I can run a report to show that agent how they're performing based upon those calls that are part of that scorecard campaign. So I can take that information to them and say, hey, Aaron, this is how many scorecards have been scored. These are your question scores for each score on that report. So if on that campaign, if I had 3 questions, I would have 3 question score columns. Each column would represent 1 question on that campaign. So I'd be able to show them how they're doing for each one, and then I'd get the composite score, which is a combination of all of them. So this is not just me listening to the call and saying, nice, here's the questions, great. I actually can take that information to the agent and say, this is how you're performing. Here's your evaluation. Okay. So how do I set up one of those scorecard campaigns? Well, it's actually pretty simple. The first thing I need to do is come into this scorecards. I'm going to go ahead and show you this again. Under recording, I go to score recordings. That will take me here to this page. Up here in the top right-hand corner, there's this button that says create new campaign. I can select that, and then from there, it's going to ask, hey, is this an agent or a group campaign or an agent campaign? You can decide that. Typically, agent is used if I'm evaluating individual agents. Obviously, group is there for me to evaluate the group collectively. I'll go ahead and say group for now, and then hit OK. Awesome. From here, I now have 4 windows of information I'm going to fill out. I am going to start with this one right here, the scorecard campaign filters. And I will tell you first and foremost, this is not required. This window is not required. Okay. These 2 on the left-hand side are. These 2 on the right-hand side are not. Scorecard campaign filters, if I hit add filter here, what this allows me to do is it allows me to say, hey, only present me recordings that fit this specific criteria. This way, I'm avoiding having recordings presented to me as part of this campaign that are not worthwhile. Let's say, for example, I have a call that's recorded that's 3 seconds long. That doesn't help me. However, I want to make sure that I have let me rephrase that. And in that case, I would want maybe a recording that's at least 2 minutes or something like that, because that way I know it's going to provide me some information. So with this campaign group filter, I would recommend just going through and saying, okay, I want to include only calls that are inbound. So right here where it says call direction, I'm going to go ahead and set this as inbound. Great. So just inbound calls. Awesome. At that point, I want to include calls that are inbound that actually had a talking event. So for event type, I might come in here and say talking. Great. The last thing I might do is we're going to use this one we've already used before, and that was event duration. I've got talking selected as my event. So I'm going to come down to event duration and say, essentially, I only want this to provide calls that had a talking event duration of greater than 2 minutes. There we go. So I don't have to add those filters, but it does help in providing me the option or the opportunity to have the best types of calls presented as part of these campaigns. Okay, so again, you don't have to do that. It's not required, but I do recommend it. All right, next thing here is now I can come up here and fill my parameters. Campaign title, let's go ahead and give this a name. This is going to be Jane's team. Okay, great. From there, start date. Start date can actually be any time, as long as it was a time when the recordings were taking place. If I've had recordings taking place since the beginning of November, great. Go ahead and select the beginning of November if you want to. Or maybe you don't want this to start till the beginning of the year. So I'm going to go ahead and say, in fact, I'll say January 4th. Okay, so you can choose when you want that to start. For example, say here, I'm going to go ahead and say December 2nd. Excuse me, November 2nd. At this point, expiration date is optional. I don't have to add an expiration date if I don't want to. For this one, I'm not going to. I want this to be kind of an ongoing thing. Okay. As a group campaign, which group would I want this to look at? I'm going to go ahead and say customer service. I could select multiples. Okay, and when I'm listening to those call recordings, I can see which group that call is for. But for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and say customer service. Hit OK. Last thing here is scoring amount. How many of their calls do I want to be able to score? Now, typically in this scenario, I have 2 options. I have scorecard count per group, or certainly let me rephrase that, scorecard count per group, or scorecard percent per group. Scorecard count is me saying, like, 15. Okay, I might say 15 calls per group out of every 100. Okay, because I don't have an expiration date there. So I might go ahead and say 15 calls per group. Maybe I want this to be a percent, however. I want to be able to score 2% of the calls. Right, so you can do that however you want. Typically, in a agent scorecard, I use count, and typically in a group scorecard, I use percent. That's just me. And that's basically it. There's one more thing I have to do, and that's my question. I'm going to come down here now and hit add. Now, I will preface this with this. You guys are going to be a lot more creative with your questions than I am. Okay. So with those questions, I might come in here. Let's start with a yes or no question. Okay. My yes or no question to start off with is, did they? Yes or no? Great. Hit OK. Let's add our next question. Let's do a scale of 1 to 10. And my question for this one is, how well? Awesome. Hit OK. And the last question here, let's do a text question. Text. Notes/comments, something like that. Okay, great. So now that I've got that in there, I can hit OK, and that's honestly it. I can hit OK and be done. But there is this last window here, and that's campaign permissions. By default, administrators and managers have access to any of these campaigns. They can create campaigns, they can listen to campaigns, they can do whatever they want. User accounts, like the one I created for Jane earlier, will not automatically have access to this. So I can give her access to this. If I select Jane's name here, that means that she can get in here and help me score these calls, which she should. This is her team. I want her to be able to help me with this. She's going to know them better than I am, right? So I'm going to give Jane permission to this. This does not mean she can create a campaign. This does not mean that she can edit this campaign. She can just get in here and help me score these calls. And that's it. I've created my campaign. I can then hit OK, and from that point, it'll then go ahead and generate my campaign. And at this point, once I have this generated, most likely there's a few calls in there, which there are. I can now go ahead and start scoring those calls. Once those calls are scored, I can then come here to reports. And the reports I would use for that campaign I just created would be like this group scorecard campaign or scores by group, either one of those. Okay. So that is how I create a scorecard campaign. That is recording library. Are there any questions about that? Okay. Any questions about anything else we've discussed today? Okay. Well, guys, I hope that this has been beneficial. Just really quickly, as a quick reminder, if you do want a copy of this recording, please put your name and your email address in the GoToMeeting chat box so that I can make sure that I send it to the right people. But other than that, before we go, I would just recommend, again, getting in here, playing with these reports, run some reports, run Cradle to Grave, learn more about what those reports do. And, if you ever need help, you always have access to these training sessions. You can come in here and ask questions, or you also have access to our support staff as well if you run into any issues. Okay? Awesome. Everybody, thank you so much for your time. Have yourselves a fantastic afternoon.